Good morning and welcome. The war on Iran is entering a more dangerous and unpredictable phase. Iran's parliament says the Strait of Hormuz will not return to its previous status, warning that passage through the strategic waterway will remain subject to Iranian control. And at the same time, President Donald Trump says the United States could reopen the strait with more time, even as reports suggest restoring full navigation may be far more difficult than Washington is publicly projecting. And on the military front, large-scale U.S. and Israeli strikes have hit Tehran, while Iran claims it did shoot down 2 American warplanes. Trump has also declared that the United States is now, in his words, in a state of war. On this special coverage episode on Qnews, we follow the latest developments from the battlefield to the Strait of Hormuz. And we find out what this escalation could mean for the region and the world. Some breaking news this morning. The Iranian parliament has declared that the Strait of Hormuz will not return to its previous status, emphasizing its strategic importance amid the current security and war challenges. Lawmakers affirmed that no country will have the right to transit the strait without Iran's permission. Management and defense of this crucial maritime choke point are under the control of the Iranian armed forces, and they vow to safeguard it rigorously. The Iranian parliament declared that its armed forces have not weakened, but gained greater battlefield experience and enhanced capabilities. They also stressed that Iran will not surrender, pledging continued resistance to strengthen the country's standing in the emerging global order and assert its strategic influence internationally. However, President Donald Trump says the United States could reopen the Strait of Hormuz with a little more time as pressure grows for a quicker end to the war. In a Truth Social post, Trump said the U.S. could, in his words, open the Strait of Hormuz, take the oil, and make a fortune. His remarks came nearly, 5 weeks into the war, with global pressure mounting on Washington to resolve a conflict that has disrupted energy supplies and shaken financial markets. Reports also said that U.S. intelligence assesses Iran is unlikely to ease its chokehold on the strait anytime soon, underscoring the gap between Trump's public confidence and the operational difficulty of restoring full navigation. And also, the UN Security Council is set to vote on a Bahraini resolution aimed at protecting commercial shipping in and around the Strait of Hormuz. Diplomats say the vote is expected today after being pushed back because of the UN holiday calendar. Bahrain, which holds the Security Council presidency this month, finalized a draft authorizing what it calls all defensive means necessary to protect shipping, after earlier versions were softened to address objections. China has made clear it opposes any use of force mandate, while Russia and France have also raised concerns, underscoring deep divisions on how to respond to Iran's closure of the strait. The waterway normally carries around a fifth of global oil and gas supplies, and its disruption has intensified pressure on energy markets. And now we are joined by the political science professor, Dr. Ismail Togi. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. Doctor, can you tell us what you make of this new directive from the Iranian parliament saying that even after the war ends, the Strait of Hormuz will be in Iranian control and you will have to get permission from Iran to use it.
My greetings to you and to your viewers. Of course, the importance of Hormuz Strait is known for everyone. One of the most important straits, water straits, which is petroleum. 20% of exported petroleum is going through the strait. It has a great strategic importance. Let's remember that this strait was opened before the U.S. Israeli military operation on February 28th, and Iran used it as a pressure card in order to try to bargain in this war, because any traditional war is it will be its loss. So it's an attempt to transfer the war into the neighborhood. One of the most important cards is to close it in the maritime navigation, which had negative consequences on increasing the prices of petroleum and oil. What we can call a great shock to the international trade that harmed all the countries which unless they secure passage in the maritime corridors, which one of the conditions of Iran, but it will be open permanently once a deal is reached, or say U.S. Safeguards in order not to attack Iran again.
How much longer do you think the Americans can put up with the Strait of Hormuz being closed, with the effect it's having on global energy markets?
From the first moment, the U.S. tried to deal militarily with this and tried to force open the strait, but the position of the strait makes it easy to down any drones which give a message that there is no way to militarily open the strait, because it may lead the region to a whole conflict. Trying to make international allies to pressure Iran to open the strait, which was a failure because a number of world countries, including Russia and China, refused this allies, and it went through the Security Council with a draft resolution by Bahrain, and there was this conflict in Security Council, the necessity of reopening the strait with military means. Everyone knows that it has to be opened politically and diplomatically in order to avoid developments and escalation. And it says that it's easy to have military maritime traps or small boats, meaning that opening the strait with this peaceful means is the optimum solution. China is trying to do so, and Russia is one of the beneficiaries of oil prices increase. There is an international trend to have a complete deal to end the crisis and reopening the strait for international trade.
Iran is using the Strait of Hormuz strategically as a leverage upon the United States and, of course, the global markets, although they did let a French ship through yesterday. What is the view would you think, of the international community, of how the Americans and the Israelis are dealing with this conflict?
Of course, since the first moment of this war, Iran has to use all cards. As we said, the Strait was one of the most important cards. Um, in order to escalate this solution with no exception to any countries, including any friendly countries, as China or developing countries. Iran tried to deal during this conflict when they saw that they have to extend the war and make everyone coast the have coasts as they did with China and Pakistan, and as if it was providing support for these countries for the stances, as for example allowing Spain and allowed France for their stances for supporting peaceful means and not to continue with war with the US. So this specialties is trying to through which trying to pressure the US, being the main reason for closing the strait. The US from his side, Trump said that closing the strait doesn't affect them and they have a reserve of oil, but eventually oil prices increased all over, including the US. They're trying to eliminate Iranian powers and widen the targets of their infrastructure and economic facilitations to force Iran to surrender. Indications say that there is still Iranian resilience, and they are still continuing in extending this operation that will have negative consequences on the world economy, unless the world is trying to have a pressure stance to end this war, open the strait in order not to impede or affect the oil prices already.
And how difficult do you think it's going to be for the relationships between Iran and other Gulf countries to recover after this war?
There is a great will be a great gap. Iran with Iran relations with neighborhood countries' relation were affected, although there was a great effort, especially by the Saudi Arabia, to reach a peaceful solution to end this war. But this war proved to anyone that hostility and rage increased between two countries and Gulf countries that were targeted by Iran with missiles, although they haven't participated in the war, and they were down the road of de-escalation, meaning that this hostility and rage will continue. We can say that Gulf Iranian relations before February 28th will not come back to the norm and will be greatly different after this round of war, and everyone will be keen on their interests against the Iranian hostilities.
Going back to this UN event and the differences at the UN and how to deal with the Strait of Hormuz. China and Russia, of course, have different positions to Western countries, especially, of course, the United States. Is this a divide that's going to cause problems with Gulf countries and Europe on one side, perhaps, and Russia and China on another at the UN?
Of course, let me tell you that this war started with no international legitimacy or UN voting or Security Council voting. So when the US goes through a draft resolution by Bahrain to condemn Iran and have international lie to open the strait, this is a dangerous thing. The attempt to build an international lie under the international legitimacy of China and Russia as its strategic relations with Iran that will not allow to have an international power with international coverage by the UN and Security Council, to have military operation knowing the risks. Therefore, China rejected, as well as Russia and even France, that allegedly saying that the strait has to be opened peacefully and in the framework of political operation. Everyone forgets that the strait was permanently open before this round of conflict. Therefore, the conflict has to end and has to think how to reopen the strait. But going to resorting to the UN during the threats of bombarding the infrastructure of Iran, this cannot be neglected in the UN, and I think countries will defend their interests, and this division will appear eventually and will not affect the Gulf countries with the relation with China, because they realize that any military operations will be harmed.
Let me just interrupt you there, if I can, Dr. Turki. We have some breaking news this morning. A missile has landed near Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant, apparently killing one person. The main nuclear facilities were untouched, and production apparently continues unaffected. That's according to Tasnim news agency. Also, U.S. Israeli airstrikes have targeted petrochemical zones, as you've been seeing on your screens. 5 have been injured there. Israeli sources say these strikes aim to inflict significant economic damage to Tehran. Iranian reports confirm extensive damage at the Bandar Imam petrochemical complex, and of course casualties, as we've been reporting. But let's just go back to that breaking news about the Bushehr nuclear power plant, with missiles landing nearby to that facility. Are we reaching a new stage where nuclear complexes seem to be targeted, and how dangerous is that?
Of course, there is great risks for the world, for Tehran, when they break the protocol in dealing with nuclear plant. And the Agency for Atomic Energy said that there is ways to deal with such facilitations and U.S. attacks that cause nuclear leaks affecting everybody. And the U.S. is obsessed to destroy any nuclear plants in Iran, which is a main goal for the U.S. is obtaining uranium and destroying the uranium for Tehran, which is around 450 to 650 kilograms of uranium, and they are thinking of land operations to destroy such facilitations, which has great risks. Therefore, the U.S. will continue to target Iranian facilities in order to guarantee their restraint of going back to the nuclear facilitations. And the other thing is whether on Iran or the whole world, Iran is responding. They're responding to targeting Maimuna plant, meaning that the challenges still persist, and U.S. insistence persists of dealing nuclear plants in in a way that breaches the optimum deal with such plans.
And finally, Dr. Turki, a few days ago, President Trump said that the war will be ending in 2 to 3 weeks. Do you think that's likely?
I think the war is evolving and everyone is expecting to continue and for example, downing those U.S. jets may push the U.S. To resist and respond, or the con, or either they respond to all international efforts for peacefully end this war. I think everyone realizes now that this war that started on February 28th without any real reason became in vain and absurd. Everyone is affected, and the US is not able to completely fulfill their goals. Iran is still responding. Israel that wants more to fuel up this war. Uh, re- Realizing that any damage is a acceptable cost to eliminate Iranian power. Everything now lies in the U.S. Administration, lies in the U.S. President, but indications on ground says that the war continues until the U.S. picture is being redeemed.
Well, thank you very much for your input this morning. Always great to have you on the program, Political Science Professor Dr. Ismail Turki. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has denounced threats to push Iran back to the Stone Age as a grave, large-scale war crime. In an earlier message to the American public, he stressed that Iran harbors no hostility towards the people of the United States and has never initiated conflict. He reaffirmed Tehran's commitment to diplomacy, underscoring that Iran pursued nuclear negotiations in good faith and upheld its obligations, while warning against escalatory rhetoric that could further destabilize the region. Large-scale US and Israeli airstrikes have hit Tehran, while Iran says it shot down 2 American warplanes. Iranian media said the capital came under heavy attack last night, with air defense systems activated after aircraft were seen over northeastern Tehran. More than 2 hours later, further strikes triggered major explosions across the city. Iranian forces also claimed and have downed a US A-10 fighter jet, saying it was the second American warplane hit that day over Iran and the Gulf. The developments came after President Trump warned that the United States could strike Iran extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. And President Trump says the United States is now in what he described as a state of war after reports that 2 American fighter jets were downed over Iran. Trump made the remarks while commenting on reports that the aircraft were shot down during this conflict. The statement comes as the war between Iran, the United States, and Israel continues to escalate across multiple fronts in the Middle East. Military tensions have intensified in the recent days following airstrikes, missile exchanges, and attacks targeting U.S. assets in the region.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, for whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Eternal life.
Now we're joined by the international economics expert, Dr. Karim Al-Omda. Thank you very much for being here with us on the program. Let's, if we can just focus on this event that happened over the last day, which is escalating this particular conflict. These 2 American warplanes that have been downed. The first fighter jet that was downed over Iran. One of the pilots were rescued. The other one is still missing in Iran, and there is a race on between the United States and Iran to find that missing pilot. Do you think this escalates the conflict?
Of course, we cannot deny that extending the war and increasing the military operations complicates the crisis. We've been in the war more than a month, and the war did not fulfill its goals until now. We have seen that the world entered a economic crisis that may increases and leads to a recession in 2026. We are in 2026, so we are still didn't recover from Russia war, Russia-Ukraine war, or even the consequences of the pandemic means that the world does not tolerate any oil problems because it's a an oil provider for inflation, and inflation will lead to even bigger economic problems that will lead to political problems for leadership around the world.
Yeah, when it comes to the global economy, how bad do you think, Dr. Amda, this is going to get? Could it be as bad as the 2008 crash? Are we looking at that kind of scale, or more on along the lines of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and COVID at that time? Where are we heading here?
Of course, it's Egypt. It will be an oil crisis as 73, as what happened in 73, and also in 2014, roughly with the Russia crisis, the petroleum barrel exceeded more than $100, which is a crisis. The more the war extends, the more the price can increase to 150 or 160, which will harm many countries around the world. And the unstable oil prices will affect many manufacturers. The countries will be most impacted are the industrial ones, especially the importing countries. And also there isn't a crisis, and although the US is trying hardly to fight China and its leverage and its cheap products, now we have a crisis, a conflict that China was buying Iranian oil and Russia oil with great discount, while France and the US may be a great harm because they buy oil with with higher prices, which will give leverage to to China, and will increase the gap, the trade gap, which will lead to the bankruptcy of many European countries.
Do you think this is going to evolve into a prolonged energy crisis? If the war ended tomorrow, how long would it take, and the Strait of Hormuz went back to as it was before the war started, how long would it take the global economy to recover?
Of course, we've seen and we followed that a few days ago, more than a week, the oil infrastructure was targeted, which is very dangerous because oil infrastructure takes time to recover. Depends on the injury level. Maybe fields, petrol pipes can take weeks, others can take months, and maybe other fields or plants may take years. If it ended tomorrow, it doesn't mean that we will go back to million barrels daily. It may need years, and it may need investments from other countries far away from the war, as Africa, that will be more targeted, and the world countries will seek more production from these countries.
Which countries' economies would you say are most vulnerable to the reduction in oil and the reduction of ships getting through the Strait of Hormuz?
Of course, the countries, the importing countries through Hormuz Strait or its supplies depend mainly on Hormuz Strait. Asian countries like India, China, Korea, maybe the US is relatively impacted as a result of the high oil price. But it's one of the biggest productive countries. But purely importing countries as Asian countries will be more impacted, as well as the European Union will suffer from oil prices increase, as they suffer from the beginning high inflation rates, and does not tolerate any more problems in this regard.
Is the conflict having an effect on global inflation?
Of course, the crisis will impact directly global inflation, as well as international growth. The two indications will be impacted: the inflation and the international growth.
And shipping insurance costs and the freight rates are rising across the Gulf. It's almost impossible to get a ship insured to pass through the Strait of Hormuz at the moment. Do you think this is going to trigger wider disruptions to global trade routes beyond just the energy shipments?
Of course, the energy shipments will be affected, but the freight costs also was there in other places, as Black Sea or Eastern European coasts, as Ukraine, Hungary, and others. There now have more than one conflict points that may lead to food crisis, and going back to food products prices increase.
Some analysts are saying that the conflict could accelerate shifts towards alternative energy. Do you think that countries will now start to look at other ways of energizing their countries? And do you think perhaps even new supply routes might be something that countries and the international community might look at?
Of course, all the solutions are temporary, whether using international reserve that may last for a few weeks, or increase the capabilities of producing oil as African countries that may need time more than 2 years. All solutions are temporary. The fastest one is reopen the strait and the oil supplies regain in their normal position.